Listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Susan Coffin at Attitude Magazine, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this week's webinar. As you all know, this began as a series of ADHD awareness webinars in the fall, and we've continued them because the demand has been so great. We've been very fortunate to have some wonderful speakers, and today we have with us Rooney, Ph.D., who's a clinical psychologist at the Child Mind Institute here in New York. She specializes in the evaluation and treatment of ADHD and behavior, anxiety, and mood disorders, working at the ADHD and Disruptive Behavior Disorder Center at the Child Mind Institute. I would like to recommend strongly the Child Mind Institute to all of you. They have a wonderful website. I think Dr. Rooney will be speaking about it again as we get into the webinar. But it's childmind.org, and they have some terrific resources, articles, and great e-newsletters. So I do want to recommend that to you. In terms of housekeeping, as any of you know who've taken part in our webinars before, we invite you to add your question to the right in the box. You will be muted. Dr. Rooney will speak briefly, and then she will take a series of questions that I will serve to her. We'll do our best to get through as many of your questions as possible, but usually there are several hundred questions, and we do our best. The speaker does their best to give a good sense of it. After the webinar, there will be an audio recording as well as a transcript ultimately on our website at attitudemag.com/webinars. And I invite you to look back and read and listen in the coming weeks. Oftentimes there's so much information in 1 hour that it's hard to grasp it all. So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Rooney, who will give a brief introduction, and then we'll take questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. Yes, I'm an expert in ADHD and do a lot of work with parents of children with ADHD to help improve behavior at home and to help communicate with the school as well, and kind of improve behavior all around in all settings. I know that many of you who are on this call have probably read a lot about behavior management in kids with ADHD and have probably tried to implement a variety of strategies at home already. So with that in mind, I'll just give a kind of a brief overview of the key components of some effective programs for managing kids' behavior, and then we'll drill down to some specific questions that come in and talk in a little bit more detail about strategies that can be implemented for those specific behaviors that many of you are probably seeing throughout the day. So as many of you probably know, research has shown over and over again that children with ADHD benefit from specific parenting strategies. And these aren't strategies that are necessarily intuitive or that anyone would just kind of know or think to implement off the top of their head. So we, as psychologists and therapists, spend a lot of time educating parents on how to apply positive parenting strategies to change their children's behavior and help them succeed. It's not easy to do this, and it takes a lot of work for parents to implement this on a day-to-day basis. And often we refer to it as parents having to be super parents to really be able to manage this behavior at home. But in the end, it really pays off, and your life becomes a lot easier overall as kids are following through on instructions. So a lot of the battles and the negotiating that goes on throughout the day to have kids follow through and do simple tasks that are just required of them, a lot of that decreases over time when you're able to use these strategies effectively. So even though parenting a child with ADHD is a complex task, when we look at the primary components that are key to most effective parenting programs, they really break down into about 5 or 6 different things. The first, and this is often overlooked because we want to just jump in and start troubleshooting the problems that come up, but really overall the foundation for any program and any effective parent-child relationship is investing time in positive relationship building with your child. So we'll talk in more detail, I think, as we go forward about how to make that special time or that quality time most effective and most valuable. but it can be even just, 5 to 15 minutes a day of special time or quality time with your child can have a big effect on the quality of your relationship and on the kind of level of compliance or follow-through that you see from your child when you ask them to do something throughout the day. The next thing is to really be clear about your expectations for behavior. And when I say be clear about it, it means not just for you to be clear in your own mind about what it is you want from your child, but to make sure that you communicate that effectively to your child so that both you and your child know exactly what behavior is expected of them. So, for example, if it's don't run down the stairs, you want to make sure that they know that also doesn't mean don't slide down the banister, don't crawl down the stairs. So if you instead say, please walk down the stairs, your child just received a really clear communication about what behavior was expected of them. Motivating your child to follow through on things that he or she is asked to do, even when it's something they don't want to do. This is what we spend a lot of time working on for kids with ADHD. Often kids with ADHD don't have that same sort of intrinsic motivation to complete something or follow through on something when it's not something they're interested in doing. So I hear from parents all the time, oh, my child's great on following through or doing something that I ask them to do when it's something they're interested in or when it's something they want to do. But when it's something that's kind of boring or not that interesting to them, then the follow-through just kind of falls away, right? So that sort of internal motivation to do something that isn't one of their favorite things to do is not the same in a child with ADHD as it is in a child without ADHD. So how do we motivate them to do something that they don't want to do? And that's really something we focus on a lot. So what we use are more external rewards and external motivators. So we pair things they don't want to do with things they want to do. So kind of an if-then. If you do this, then you can do that. And we have various strategies and various ways of implementing that and making it effective at home and at school. The next piece is to use negative consequences sparingly, but also effectively. So when you do have to put a negative consequence in place, or another word for that would be a punishment in place, you want to make sure that it's effective when you do it so that you at least got something out of that and the child learned something from it. But you also want to use it as sparingly as possible because too much punishment or too many negative consequences can actually have a detrimental effect on not only your relationship with your child, but also your child's ability to learn how to behave appropriately. And last but not least is really being consistent in your follow-through and on your use of the strategies. So you can learn about all of these things and try them out, but if the consistency isn't there over time, then their effectiveness is going to be greatly diminished. So it's really those, I would say those 5 components that are probably most important regardless of the parenting program or parenting approach that you're taking. So I think we can kind of open it up to the floor and take questions.
Okay, that was really helpful. I have to say that your comment about having positive time brought to mind one of the readers who posted a question in advance spoke about the fact that being, quote, super psychotically fun mom works really well but gets really tiring. So I thought that was sort of a real-life comment from someone who is trying to use the positive side of behavior.
And that makes a lot of sense, and it is exhausting, right? To always have to be on and kind of turn it on all the time, right? And so I would even recommend trying to kind of focus in on just a key time every day if you can, of even just 5 or 10 minutes, where you can get in a really powerful dose, we would say, of quality time with your child. And the key component of that time is to try to not place any demands on your child. And by demands, I mean not asking them to do something, not asking them too many questions, right? Not correcting what they're doing, not even praising it, because that's evaluative. You're evaluating what they're doing. You want to just really give them the freedom to be who they are and enjoy that time with them and enjoy who they are. So
is this analogous to floor time in some senses that Dr. Greenspan always recommends? Hanging out?
A little bit. a little bit,
Yeah.
but the key component is for the child to be sort of, it's child-directed. You want that time to be
Okay.
child-directed. So, and to not have any evaluation component or any kind of questions or commands coming out at that time. And it's really hard to do because when you think about what you spend most of your time doing as a parent, it's praising your child for something, asking your child to do something, correcting something, teaching them something. It's a lot of that throughout the day. And for a kid with ADHD, that can get kind of exhausting over time.
Right.
But during this time, it's really just about following your child's lead, enjoying your time with them, just enjoying who they are and kind of getting into their world for a bit and just kind of seeing things from their perspective. And I think one of the best ways to do this, what I've found in working with many families, is having your child teach you about something that they like to do that you don't know much about. So it might be a game that they like to play, or if you have girls, if they like to do arts and crafts or beading or make jewelry, they can kind of guide you along and show you how they do it. And because it's something you don't know that much about, you know, you really can't correct them on too many things, or you can't give them too many instructions. They're really the one doing that. And that's one of the easiest ways to sort of just follow their lead and go along with them. So having a dose of that time can be really relaxing for the child and really help work on the parent-child relationship.
That's a great suggestion. Someone posted just during the webinar now that she started doing puzzles with her child, which also seems to be something that might be fun to do together. It's not it's not her child teaching her necessarily, but an activity that's neutral.
Exactly. It's neutral. It's not competitive, right? That's the other piece of it. You don't want it to be something competitive because that's inherently evaluative, right? You're either winning or you're losing. So it's just something you're doing together, and you can praise a lot during that time if you want to, right? So it's just to kind of keep it going and get some positives in there, like, oh, I see that you put the green piece over there and you matched it up. You're kind of describing their behavior, but it's not an over-the-top praising of, you're doing such a good job. Wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, right. You know, it's more just, oh, I see you putting, I see you putting that green one over there. You matched it up. So kind of just narrating what they're doing a little bit rather than the actual over-the-top praising.
Okay. Well, turning, unfortunately, to the topic of getting kids to do things they don't want to do, we do have a significant number of questions from parents who say things like, I have to ask my child 20 times to come to the dinner table, or I have a very difficult time getting my child up in the morning. Can you address symptoms of methods for addressing sort of daily behavior, just the regular, not extreme, but just the regular tasks of daily life that ADHD kids can be resistant to following through on?
So often the questions that come up from parents that I get are about, a lot of them tend to fall just under the heading of follow through or compliance. I ask my child to do something and they don't do it, right?
Right.
And that might be in the morning, it might be at dinner time, it might be in the evening, it might be, you know, at any point in time. Usually within a family there's key sticking point times. Like there'll be one time that's harder than other times. For some families it's the morning. For some families, it's homework time. For others, it's dinner. And when you're thinking about what's going on at that time, why are things breaking down, you want to think about what is happening before that time when you see that behavior, so your child's not following through and not coming to the dinner table, and what's happening afterwards. So what is the consequence of their negative behavior, right? So around dinner time, often kids are having a hard time transitioning from whatever it was that they were doing before, especially if they were doing something fun, and then they have to stop doing it. And especially if that something fun involves a screen, then it's especially challenging, right? So in thinking about that, you can help by giving kids a warning and having a really consistent time to the extent possible of when you're having dinner, or at least let them know ahead of time. So if dinner is going to be at 6 o'clock, make sure your child knows ahead of time, we're going to be having dinner at 6. I need you to start winding down around, 1:45, and I'm going to come over and let you know and give you a heads up. So that part at least gives them the warning. Then the next piece of it is that in order to get them to dinner, you kind of need to have something to motivate them, to have an incentive, to be able to stop playing on the computer or watching TV or running around with their friends outside at that time. So because dinner happens every day, it's actually a really good time to use something that we call grandma's rule. I'm not sure why it's called that, but often we call it grandma's rule. And that's where if you do this hard thing, then you get this fun thing that happens, right? So if you come to dinner the first time that you're asked and you sit down, politely at the dinner table, then after dinner, you will be able to X, Y, or Z. Right? That might be, you might be able to have 15 minutes of video game time, or you and your sister can go play up in your room together before we have homework, or you can have a special treat after dinner. So it doesn't have to be, it can be something social like playtime or fun time with the family. It can be a treat. It can be video game time. Whatever it is, as long as it's something that the child really genuinely enjoys, right? It's only rewarding if it's something the child finds rewarding. So if it's something you think your child might like, but come to find out they actually don't because Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were so like 5 years ago, right, and now they don't care anymore about being able to go play with those, then it's not actually rewarding. So you want to make sure you ask your child, what is it that you would like to do, and have that happen after dinner based on really clear expectations for what the behavior is. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the same thing in the morning, let's say, right? You can have really clear expectations about what's expected in the morning. And I would recommend, and with most of the families that I work with, we end up creating a chart or a checklist. And I'm sure many of you have tried to do this before with behavior charts. What I would recommend is picking a really specific time of the day to do it. So morning routine falls into that category. And breaking out, let's say, the 5 specific things that your child needs to do every morning, right, in order to be able to get out of the house. So it might be getting out of bed at a certain time, brushing their teeth, eating breakfast, and getting dressed, and having their shoes on and being at the door by a certain time. So let's say you have those 5 things. So your child has to do that every morning. They can check off or get a sticker, or you can check off or give them a sticker for each of those things that they do. And then at the end of the day, if they earn their points, and let's say that there's 5 total that they could possibly get, you would want them to have to earn about 4 of those points. We don't necessarily need them to be perfect. We want them to have get there to about 80% is the general rule of the total points. So if it was 10 points, they'd have to earn about 8 in order to earn whatever incentive it is that they can earn later on in the day. And have that be their routine in the morning, and have something preferably every day that they can earn. Some kids, they get so excited about the check marks and the stickers that they sort of forget they're earning something. Other kids, the check marks or stickers are totally meaningless unless they have something that they really, really want and value that they're earning at the end of that day. And for kids that already have video game time or TV time on a daily basis, you can tie that into it. They get 20 minutes of video game time at the end of the day if they get their points in the morning. For other kids, if they are able to finish, if you can set a completion time, let's say you need to be out of the house by 7:40, but if they can get up at 6:30, be done by 7:20, then they can watch TV or play video games for 20 minutes before they go to school. And then you've wrapped everything up right in that morning, and you don't even need to worry about giving them an incentive or a reward later on in the day. It's kind of because they have that extra time now, because they made sure to get through all of their stuff quickly, they naturally now have that block of time when they can do something fun. Screens just tend to be easiest, which is why I'm using video games or TV, but it can be anything. It can be playing, it can be reading a book, it can be shooting some hoops outside when it's nice outside in the summertime or in the spring. So whatever it is, as long as it's something fun that they enjoy, ideally if you can fit that in the morning, that's the best. But if not, you can add it in at the end of the day. So that's how I kind of would recommend handling it.
Okay. Interestingly, there are two questions here that I'll bring up here in the context of getting your child to dinner. One person who said their child takes an endless amount of time to eat dinner. I mean, 20 minutes to eat a bowl of cereal, 45 minutes to get your dinner. And another person who says that they have to literally lock the food up or he'll eat everything in sight. Are these eating behaviors related to ADD? Are these behavioral? Do you have any thoughts on these two parents' comments?
They can be related to ADHD. With the taking a long time to eat, the things that I would wonder about if somebody were in my office and asking this question, I would want to know, does that only happen at dinner, that they take a long time to eat, or does it also happen at other meals? And so if it's only at dinner, then what are other things that are going on at that time? Is it a family meal? Is it distracting? Is it something where it's become a control battle, where the parent, appropriately concerned about their child's nutrition, has said, well, you need to eat this. We're not going to do anything else unless you eat this. And they're being stubborn and saying, no, I'm not going to. And at times it can become a control battle. And they're getting so much attention during that time, even though it's negative attention, it's still attention, which can be very rewarding to kids, even when it's not positive. So if they're getting a lot of attention during that time, then they are kind of invested in stalling and not eating and dragging it out as long as possible. So, so those are some things that I would just sort of think about and try and parse out as a parent. And if there is a lot of negative attention going on, then I would try and reverse it, where if you finish your food by this time, then we can have this fun time together afterwards. We're going to spend 15 minutes or 5 minutes together doing something fun. So that attention comes, but it's in a positive way later on. And tons of praise when the child eats their food more quickly. So. And then with the wanting to eat everything in sight issue, that comes up, happens. Some of it can be related to impulsivity that we see in kids with ADHD. I hear a lot from parents that their children, just want to eat junk food. That's all they want. I can't get them to eat anything else. I hear that from parents of kids who don't have ADHD as well. So it's not specific to ADHD necessarily, but the impulsivity can make it harder. So that's something that I would recommend working with a therapist on. Anytime you're dealing with issues around food and eating, you want to be really careful about the message that you're sending. So it's kind of the everything in moderation is the best message to try and send. And there's no bad foods or good foods, but we want to eat things in moderation. And when we eat our healthy stuff, like our vegetables and our proteins, then we can have as a treat some of these other things. It's just that we can't have them all the time. But I recommend working with a therapist on issues related to overeating.
Coming back to the system of the rewards, there are 3 or 4 people here, Felicia, Haley, who have posted that their children seem absolutely not motivated by rewards, or they haven't come up with any rewards that seem to work. And wondered if you could delve further into the question of rewards.
There are some kids, so it's interesting, there's some kids that are so easy to come up with rewards for. They get so excited about so many different things that are pretty easy to put into place as rewards. And then there are those kids where it's like, my gosh, my child's just really not getting that excited about anything in particular, and they could kind of take it or leave it. They like this, but if they don't get it, that's fine. It's not really a big deal to them, right? So those kids are hard to reward. So that's a good question, and it is challenging. I recommend, working with your child as much as you can to kind of figure out with them what is it that they like, if there is anything. If it's that your child really only likes kind of bigger things, sometimes it's hard to find smaller things that your child likes that you can reward with on a daily basis. If it is bigger things, something that's worked with a number of families is to take a picture of something, the thing that they want. Let's say it's a new pair of sneakers, or one family was ready to get a pet and the child wanted an iguana. The family was ready for it. So in that case, it was an iguana. But obviously, you can't give your child an iguana a day. So for that family, we had them take a picture of an iguana, just print one off on the internet, and cut it up into 4 different pieces, almost like a puzzle. You can even cut it into a puzzle if you want to. There's some apps for that. But the child can then earn a piece of the puzzle, right, every week or depending on the frequency, but no more than every week. That's the max you could go to. And they earn a piece, and they kind of build the puzzle as they go. If you want it to be daily, then you could cut it into smaller pieces, and they earn a different piece a day. I just wouldn't string it out more than, for some kids it's hard to go more than 2 weeks. Other kids, as they get older, they can handle 4 weeks, depending on how potent that reward is. So that's a way to handle something that's bigger. Okay.
So you're really saying find something that they
something that they like,
want,
but it is hard. I don't want to minimize what they're asking, because it is really hard. Another kid that really liked video games, but not just playing them, he always wanted new ones. We had him earn $1 toward a GameStop gift card a day, and then at the end of the month he would be able to get his GameStop gift card. But we would put a little G on just on the regular family calendar for every day that he earned one of those. So you have to kind of get creative about it, though. It is hard, but the more creative you can get, there's always something you can find.
Yeah, there are questions here about the use of screen time. They vary from, is there a recommended amount of screen time per day? Is there any research linking screen time to poor behavior? I guess in general, I think in today's world, parents have a very tough time. We see this repeatedly, managing their children's screen time. They're frequently told to limit it, but the reality of schoolwork online and Facebook, and it's a very tough one, I think, for everybody these days.
It is. It's really hard.
Wondered if you had thoughts on that.
So with younger kids, it's a little bit easier because they're not using as many of sort of the social media websites. It's not as central to their social life when they're in at least the first 3 years or so of elementary school. As they get older, it becomes more challenging. But I generally recommend to parents no more than an hour a day total, right? And that's between video games and TV time. I wouldn't include homework in there, like if they need to look something up on the internet for homework. But in general, try and limit it to no more than an hour a day. Some families want to do less, but generally an hour a day seems to be okay. The research is just really mixed. I think what it shows is that when kids get up to an extreme amount of TV or video game time a day, then you do see a variety of behavioral and health-related consequences from that. But in more moderate amounts, there really isn't any evidence, as far as I know, that it has a negative impact on the child. Where it gets sticky for kids with ADHD is that they find the screen time so engrossing and so, I don't know how to say it, like they kind of just get so sucked in that it can be hard for them to transition out of it, right? So when you might say, okay, you've earned a half an hour of screen time, now your half an hour is up, and then they're back, oh, just a minute, I'm not done yet, one more minute, or, some kids will really act out quite extremely sometimes with that when it's time to hand over the iPhone or, whatever it might be. So what I recommend doing is tying their ability to hand over the electronics or stop the electronics to their ability to have that available to them the next day. So as long as you hand over or stop playing, with one or fewer reminders, right, and do it respectfully and explain to them what that means, no complaining, no shouting, using a nice tone of voice. As long as you do that, then you can get your screen time tomorrow. But if you don't, you're going to lose that tomorrow. You don't have any tomorrow, right? And then they have to wait a day before they can get their screen time back. So that works really effectively for a lot of kids because it's giving them a reason to follow through on stopping, even when they don't want to stop.
Well, that actually links really well into questions that people have about consequences. They're wondering what you suggest for negative consequences or for consequences that are effective. And so you've just given a good example of a consequence that is tied to the next day.
Yep. And what I always recommend and what the research shows in general is that the more that you can use positive motivators to motivate the good behavior. So giving a clear expectation, letting them know ahead of time, if they do this, then they will have that, or be able to do that, then that's the best way to get compliance with something and the best way to really shape behavior, because you're teaching kids what to do, right? When you do this positive thing, then you get this. When you're using negative consequences, really what you're doing is just saying, don't do that, but you're not teaching them what to do in place of that, right? And it also can start to make kids sneaky. If they're getting punished for something, what they start to do is kind of try and do it behind your back or try and hide what they're doing. But there are times where you do need to use negative consequences. You can't get away from it altogether. And those times tend to be times where the activity that they're doing is so rewarding and so reinforcing in and of itself, like playing video games or watching TV, that it doesn't matter what positive you have coming after that. There's nothing more powerful than what they're doing already. Does that make sense? It's kind of a difficult concept. So if it's so rewarding even to be teasing your sister, like he just loves teasing his sister and that's so much fun for him, it doesn't matter what else he's got coming to him, that's the most rewarding thing at that time. At those times, a negative consequence needs to be put in place. For younger kids, timeout can be really effective as long as you're doing it appropriately. And going through the appropriate steps of timeout right now would take too much time, but if you go to childmind.org, we have information on there about timeout and how to use it effectively.
That would be so helpful, yeah.
Yeah, so that's on our website. If you go on there and Google or search for timeout, you'll find information about how to use it effectively. And then, so timeout can be a good effective strategy because it's really timeout from anything positive that's going on. That's how I think about it. So removing them from anything that's fun. And then, you know, a lot of times kids have a lot of things throughout the day that are actually privileges that we don't think of as privileges because they're just things they get. It's like screen time or, you know, being able to watch TV, screen time, fun activities that they might do on a regular basis. Try and start to think about those things that they do throughout the day as privileges, something that they get because they're having good behavior, right? They're not just things that the child's entitled to because they're a child. So screen time in particular tends to come up as something that is truly a privilege. It's not necessary. They're not building social skills by doing it necessarily. They're not getting any educational value out of it. So it is something that you can take away without having a negative impact on the child. So I often recommend removing screen time, or for older kids, their cell phone as a consequence. Right. The thing to do, though, is to not take it away for too long of a period of time. Just 1 day or 2 days for most behaviors is plenty of time. For some kids, even just an evening without it is plenty of time. It doesn't need to be an extreme negative consequence. There's a lot of research showing that a smaller consequence has the same effect on changing behavior as a bigger consequence. Once it gets too big, it's very hard to follow through on. And as parents, you start punishing yourself almost, having to follow through on the grounding or the taking away of the electronics for too long of a time because it's so hard to follow through on. And it's better to give a smaller consequence and follow through than a bigger consequence that you have to backtrack on. Because then kids learn, well, if I negotiate enough or if I whine enough, or then I can get out of this and I can get my stuff back. So a smaller consequence that you can follow through on.
Yeah, that makes huge sense. In terms of the positive consequences of the grandma's rule, there are a number of people posting either that they themselves feel that they're rewarding behavior that should be done otherwise, or that their spouse is uncomfortable with what seems to be rewarding behavior that a child should be able to do.
Yes, and I hear this from parents. I hear it all the time from parents. Parents asking this question all the time, and so do teachers actually at school. And the way to think about it is the behavior that you want to happen, the behavior you're going to be rewarding, is something that's not happening currently. Right? The child's not doing it currently. Maybe they should be doing it, but they're not doing it. And for kids with ADHD, something that might seem simple enough might be actually harder for a child with ADHD to do. A lot of times it's harder to not procrastinate. It's harder to initiate something. It's harder to follow through on something that has multiple steps. It's harder to remember to do that same thing every day. So often they do need a little extra incentive to kind of help them click their brain into action to follow through on those things that they need to do. But regardless of whether they should be doing it, they're not, right? So your choices are to punish them for it, which doesn't necessarily motivate them to do it. It just kind of has a negative consequence for not doing it. But if you reward them for it, then you're motivating them to do it. And really the goal is to see behavior change, right? That's really our goal. And the most effective way to do it is by having a positive motivator and clear expectations and consistency in place. Once they're doing it, once it becomes habit, once it becomes routine and they've formed a new habit with doing it, you can take a lot of that positive reinforcement away because they've mastered that activity that they were supposed to be doing. And you can focus on other things throughout the day that now they've kind of shifted over to and focus on a different time that you are now looking to motivate a behavior change to put in place.
I wonder if you agree with a speaker last week, I think it was last week, mentioned that parents oftentimes have unrealistic expectations because they don't accept the reality that, in his view, children with ADHD are 30%, I think he said 30% younger than their chronological age in terms of their behavior. Is that something that you've seen also?
Definitely. I mean, I tend to think of kids with ADHD, just in my own mind, as about 1 to 2 years younger when it comes to executive functioning. And many of you have probably heard that word, executive functioning, but it's a number of functions that fall under one part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that even now in fMRI studies, they show a delayed development of that part of the brain in kids with ADHD. And so things like planning, follow-through, multi-step instructions, like I was mentioning before, initiating an activity, not procrastinating, that tends to be about 1 to 2 years younger in kids with ADHD than in kids without. So the expectations do need to be adjusted for kids with ADHD. And it can be much harder for them to do many of the things that might come easier to another kid the same age who doesn't have ADHD.
Right. In terms of the spouse's family agreement, both between the partners as well as applying the same standards to children who don't have AD, those who don't. I mean, do you have any thoughts on the impact on the family dynamic of these sorts of behavior techniques? Sounds like it can be challenging.
It can be. So the main thing, and I'm sure everyone has heard this before and it's easier said than done, but is to co-parent in a way that is consistent. So whatever is coming from one parent is coming from the other parent as well, and to have the same standards and to be on the same page with things. So that takes communication, kind of behind the scenes, not in front of your child. So talking about what the expectations are, this is where charts can actually become very helpful because it becomes something that's documented. This is what we're expecting in the morning. This is what the morning routine looks like. This is what we have listed out as what they get for when they go through their morning routine. It helps to have everyone on the same page when you have something like that.
Right.
But really being able to work together and communicate so that everyone knows, I put this child in timeout. He needs to be in timeout right now. You need to communicate that to other members of the household, whether that's a babysitter, a spouse, an older sibling. Everyone needs to know because if somebody goes over and starts playing with or engaging that child, suddenly the timeout's totally useless. It's not a timeout anymore. So it's all about communication. If it's something that's a major struggle at home, then I strongly recommend meeting with a behavioral therapist to focus on communication and have both parents go and talk about it together and have some strategies that the therapist can kind of work through that will work for both parents and across households if there's 2 separate households.
Right, right. I wanted to turn to a thorny subject that is frequently brought up in our webinars and has been today, and that is homework. We have some parents whose children are resistant to doing homework at all, who are sort of non-motivated, others who are aggressive or nasty when it comes time to do homework, and others who are just have a difficult time focusing. So the homework hour seems to be one of the most difficult for many parents of kids with ADHD, and I wondered what your thoughts were on homework.
Yeah, homework is definitely one of the biggest kind of battlegrounds that happen for kids with ADHD. On our website, on childmind.org, we actually have a number of different videotaped presentations given by different therapists here talking specifically about homework time. We have some from our learning specialist group here talking about how to help kids stay organized during homework time and how to help motivate them through homework time. So I strongly recommend for parents who are having difficulty with that, if you just go to childmind.org and in the search box type homework, and you'll just get a list of everything on our site that covers that topic. So homework's actually a really complex time, which is why I'm recommending that parents dig in deeper and look online. But it actually involves a whole bunch of steps. It seems so simple when we say just do your homework. But when you think about what it involves planning, it involves organizing, it involves staying motivated through doing something that's not pleasant in particular, not enjoyable, and doesn't have an immediate reward to it. And often you're having to do it in place of the perceived idea that you could be doing something else that's more fun at that time. And it happens at a time when kids are tired. And for kids with ADHD, if they take a stimulant medication during the day, it's often worn off by homework time. So they might have a particularly difficult time paying attention, whereas they could have an easier time during the day. For motivating kids to do homework, really coming up with a structured plan for that time is best. You can do it kind of similarly to what I talked about with the morning routine, but really laying out what your expectations are for homework. So it might be sitting down and getting started with one or fewer reminders, right, and staying on task until the work is done, and scheduling breaks in there. So it might be that kids can only work for, depending on the age of the child, might only be able to work for 10 minutes and then need a 5-minute break, or 15 minutes and then need a 5-minute break. You can put into your expectations that your child needs to return to start their homework again when the timer goes off. After 5 minutes, they need to go back and get started right away. And if they do those things, then they earn, a privilege that they can do afterwards. So if they have screen time every night, the screen time comes only after the homework's been done, ever, and be consistent with that. And you need to be able to check off those boxes on your list in order for them to earn that screen time. So I think the breaks can be a key part of that, because it really is hard for kids with ADHD to sustain their attention for a very long time like that. And they actually can get through homework faster if they have scheduled breaks than they would if you try to push them straight through, because they peter out. Otherwise, you're arguing about trying to get them on task. They're zoning out. They're not staying focused. So scheduling in those breaks, but also an incentive for returning after the break is key. Also, it helps if you can supervise. So have them someplace where you can see what they're doing. You don't have to sit with them necessarily if your child's able to do homework independently, but just having an adult around, sort of moving around the room, being present, actually helps the child stay focused and stay on task. So if you're making dinner, maybe you're making dinner in the kitchen and they're sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. You don't want them up in their bedroom or in a room where you can't see them, because then you don't know what they're doing. You don't know if they're doing their homework or not. So I would say, to kind of summarize, come up with really clear expectations for what they want. They only earn their screen time or another fun activity if they follow through on those things on your checklist, and to have homework done in an area that's organized and in the presence of an adult who can kind of supervise from afar.
Okay. Yeah, the motivation issue seems to be key for so many parents on homework. They just feel, parents will say that my kid just doesn't care, says school is worthless, and they don't care about school. So for a lot of kids, because kids with ADHD have a harder time with the kind of internal, what we call intrinsic motivation, like doing something for the sake of doing it, or because you have this long-term goal of wanting to do well in school,
a long-term goal like that is really hard for a kid with ADHD. They have a really hard time keeping that in their mind. Like, if I do this now, it's going to be really helpful for me. I'm going to get a good grade at the end of the quarter. Or if I do this well, a couple of days from now, I might get a good grade back. There isn't that immediacy with homework that they have with some other tasks that they have to do.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this delayed reward with it that for something that's not pleasant necessarily to be doing in the first place. And that makes it really hard for kids to stay motivated during that time. And don't forget that for kids with ADHD, it is harder to stay focused. It does take this sort of mental effort to really stay focused on what they're doing. So it is challenging for them to complete a task like that that isn't inherently motivating. So because of that, you really do need to use an external reinforcer. Like, when you get through this, then you'll be able to play your video games or go outside and play or whatever it is. If you have a child who, when you put a reinforcer like that in place or a reward in place, they rush through their work because sometimes that happens. It's like, I'm going to get through this as quickly as possible. I don't care about the quality. I just want to get out and play. Then part of your checklist or part of your requirements needs to be that the work is done neatly and carefully. And they're not allowed to move on to do whatever the fun thing is until you've come and checked to make sure that that's the case. Right? So that's just part of the requirement, and that will slow them down. But really, you do need to have a powerful sort of external reinforcer in place to be able to motivate them to get them through that challenging time. If you have a child where even that's not working, then I would recommend considering meeting with a psychiatrist or psychopharmacologist to talk about medication options, because it might be that being able to focus at that time is so challenging for them that medication would be helpful. And on our website, we have a lot of information about medication for kids with ADHD.
Okay. There are a number of questions here from parents whose kids, when the parents try to, as they must inevitably, correct their behavior, get them to dinner, get them to get up, brush their teeth, whatever it may be, whose kids say, I'm stupid, I'm bad, and the parents are sort of concerned about how to handle, behavior correction without sort of reinforcing what's already a self-esteem issue for so many kids with ADD who are constantly being told that they're misbehaving, they're bad, they're not acceptable, et cetera.
Yeah, that's hard. So one piece of that is what I was talking about at the beginning, which is trying to build in that quality time almost every day where you do have some positive time with your child, and that helps to sort of offset some of the negative feedback that they're receiving throughout the day. Another piece of it is to increase the amount of praise that you're giving your child throughout the day, right? So we sometimes call it catching them being good. It's so easy for kids, particularly kids with ADHD, for parents to sort of let sleeping dogs lie, so to speak. Like, when there's nothing bad happening and it's kind of quiet and you're like, oh, good, I'm just glad that things are quiet right now. I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm just going to kind of tiptoe away. And, well, it's at those times when things are going well that you really want to take the opportunity to praise your child and say, I really like how you and your sister are playing quietly together right now. Or, thank you so much for coming over right away when I asked you to. Or, thank you for starting to set the table when I asked. Praising those things. And the way to start building that habit in yourself is to pick one behavior that you want to start praising and focus on for the week, let's say. So you want to pick something that currently happens sometimes, but not as much as you would like it to. So it has to happen at least sometimes, or else you've got nothing to praise. So if it's something you really wish was happening, but it never happens, that's not the thing to pick. Often, following an instruction the first time you asked is something good to pick because it happens throughout the day, and chances are your child does that at least once or twice during the day. So thank you so much for coming over when I asked you to. Thank you so much for looking at me when I called your name. That really helps me to know that you're listening. Playing calmly or quietly with their child or with their sibling. Picking just one thing to start focusing on can help you build that habit and then start generalizing to other times. So loading on that praise really helps to offset some of the corrections that you're giving throughout the day. Adding in those kinds of, like I said, those behavior plans or those charts in the morning or in the evening can help you provide a positive way to have your child follow through on the behaviors without having to give the negatives when they're not doing it. So if in the evening it's you have to brush your teeth, wash your face, and get into bed by a certain time, and then they earn an extra 10 minutes of reading time together with you, then they're motivated to do those things, and they know what's expected of them. And you don't need to correct, you don't need to punish. The negative consequence might be they don't get their extra 10 minutes of reading time, but there's something that they're working toward rather than it becoming a control battle in the evening.
Okay, I want to turn to a difficult topic now, which I've been waiting toward the end to bring up, which is there are parents who have posted here whose kids are extremely, violent is too strong a word, but extremely aggressive, hitting, yelling, nasty comments, very difficult to control. In some cases, parents say that this happens when their child is hungry or when they're tired. Sometimes it happens unpredictably. Sometimes, in some cases, the child can be absolutely lovely at certain times, and then at other times, oftentimes, according to parents, unpredictably will become really just nasty, violent, aggressive toward both parents, siblings, whatever. What thoughts do you have about this kind of extremely oppositional behavior? This is beyond oppositional in the way that many people describe it.
Yeah, so that behavior, so when kids really act out in a violent or aggressive way, is sometimes happens in kids with ADHD. More often than not, it's not necessarily part of ADHD. It can be part of oppositional defiant disorder, which happens in conjunction with ADHD. About 40% of the time it co-occurs with ADHD. But figuring out why the aggression's happening and why the violent outbursts are happening really takes working closely with a behavioral psychologist to parse out what's going on, because there can be so many different underlying causes. But it's not necessarily typical of a child with ADHD to act out aggressively and violently. If you have a younger child, a child under 6 who is extremely oppositional, they don't follow through on anything that you ask them to do, they act out violently, kicking, hitting, spitting, screaming, when asked to do something that they don't want to do, and they're under the age of 6 or younger, then parent-child interaction therapy could be an appropriate intervention after a thorough assessment. And that intervention, we offer it here in New York at the Child Mind Institute, but it's offered throughout the country by therapists trained in this particular kind of therapy. And in that kind of therapy, a parent, one at a time, the mom or the dad, are behind a one-way mirror and interacting with their child, and they're coached in specific skills on how to manage their child's behavior by the therapist, who is on the other side of the mirror with a microphone, and the parent has a speaker in their ear. So we're able to coach parents directly on how to handle the outbursts when they happen. We have specific skills and strategies that we teach, and also how to have positive interactions with their child at other times that really help to build up the positive relationship. For more information on PCIT, you can go to www.pcit.org. And on our website, we have a lot of information just about aggression in children and kind of what kinds of questions to ask of yourself, or kind of try and parse out what's going on and prepare yourself for a visit with a psychologist. So if you go onto childmind.org and type in aggressive, the word aggressive in the search box, it'll pull up a total of, I think, like 60 different articles or videos that talk about aggressive behavior in kids, and a variety of different causes and a few ideas about intervention. But really it's something that requires an intensive intervention with a behavioral psychologist. And for younger kids, parent-child interaction therapy is what I would recommend.
So this aggressive, very very physically aggressive and verbally aggressive behavior is time to bring in some help. Is what I think what you're saying, right? Yeah. Okay. A couple of questions here related to parents' response to behavior at school. Parents are saying, should they be trying to reward or give negative consequences for behavior that takes place at school that's reported to them by teachers?
So it's important overall to have a good line of communication with the school in general about what's going on. And so if there's negative behavior going on at school, first of all, you want to try and find out and work with the school to figure out what's going on. Why are these outbursts happening? Is it related to other kids in the classroom? Is it related to the fact that the child is having difficulty learning what's being presented in the classroom? Are they in a classroom setting that's too noisy or too chaotic for them to be able to focus? You want to do some analysis to try and figure out what's going on there, and working with the school and probably the school psychologist to figure some of that out. When that's already been done and there's a good plan in place, then you can work with the school to have consequences or rewards put into place at school for good behavior. And you can also reward or have a negative consequence at home when there is bad behavior at school. Ideally, you would be able to have a relationship with the school where they can let you know on a daily basis through something we call a daily report card, which is basically a behavioral plan for kids in the classroom. They can let you know on a daily basis how they did at school, and then you can praise and or reward that behavior at home so that there's clear communication between the school and home. In order for that to be effective, you need to have daily communication with the school, though, in the form of a sheet or something that comes home, because you can't effectively reward or punish a behavior that happened at school if you don't know that it happened. So
right.
Communication is really the key. But it's fine to handle that at home and provide an incentive or praise or a punishment if there's something very serious that happened.
Okay. A question about lying and impulsive stealing. A couple of parents mentioned this sort of lying and stealing sort of seem to link it to impulsivity, sort of behavior that's sort of not well thought through, I guess.
Yeah, lying and stealing, we see that in some kids with ADHD, not all kids with ADHD, but in some. And the reasons for that can be, there can be a whole bunch of different reasons for it. So it's really hard for me to go into depth on that in a format like this, but they're serious behaviors, as I'm sure you know, and I would strongly recommend working with a behavioral psychologist to figure out why those things are happening. If with the lying, if it's lying specifically to get out of something or lying to sort of avoid punishment, and that's the consistent nature of why these lies are happening, then what that says to me is there might be a lot of kind of negative consequences or punishment going on at home for things. And so the child has resorted to trying to be sneaky about getting away with their behavior and lying to get out of a negative consequence. So if that's the type of lie that's happening, you want to make sure that you're shifting to more of a positive incentive model for changing behavior at home rather than negative consequences as sort of the consistent model of what's being used. If it's other types of lying and if it's stealing, it's more than I can get into right now with only a couple of minutes left. But I would recommend, we have information on our website about this as well, but I would also recommend meeting with a behavioral psychologist to address that.
Okay. Well, Dr. Rooney, this has been incredibly helpful. Are there any last words of advice that you would like to say before we close? It's a complicated topic, and I think you've done it justice, and we thank you.
It is complicated, and I think I would just ask parents of kids with ADHD to appreciate the fact that you do have a difficult task as parents. You know, if you're feeling tired, you're feeling frustrated, you know, you do have a difficult task that you're dealing with, but there are ways to make it easier by doing the kinds of things that we talked about. And if you are feeling overwhelmed, if you are feeling isolated, if you are feeling stressed, reach out and try and seek help. Attitude Magazine's wonderful. CHADD.org is a great organization for parents and adults with ADHD, and they have support groups throughout the country so you can connect with other parents. And do look for a psychologist who specializes in ADHD and takes a behavioral approach to intervention to help you implement some of the strategies that we talked about today.
I think that's great advice. Certainly finding other people, whether it be through a CHAD support group or on our website, ADD Connect, you can chat with other parents who are going through similar difficult things, and that can be very helpful. So thank you so much, Dr. Rooney. Thank you, everyone. Our next two webinars, the next one is on March 11. It's with Dr. Fred Frankel, who's written a number of books on friendship for children. He's going to be specifically talking about how to encourage your child's friendships. And then on March 15th, we're going to have Chris Dendy, who is a specialist in school, working with teachers in schools to help your ADHD child succeed. So we're looking forward to those two. And thank you all again. Thanks again, Dr. Rooney, and goodbye, and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.